On a Tuesday evening, it's the Volquest.com podcast with Austin Price, Jesse Simonton, and Rob Lewis. Brent Hubbs, glad to have you along with us. Tennessee having their day in Hoover here at SEC Media Days. Just in general, what's your takeaway from Tennessee today? Jesse, I'll start with you.
I thought Jeremy did really well, and I thought, for me, this day was all about his budding relationship with not only the team, but specifically the guy that I think Tennessee needs to lead the way this year, and that's Jarrett Guarantano. And there was a lot of talk about how they developed their relationship. You had the story, some blueberry cobbler and a little dinner with Jarrett and his girlfriend that got kind of the ball rolling in February. And since then, we've seen Jarrett and specifically Jeremy kind of completely change, the attitude and kind of how they seem to talk about one another. And I think that was very apparent, at Hoover today.
I think, Austin, it's pretty clear the two need each other. Where Jared wants to go in his career as a football player, he needs his head coach to completely buy in and believe in him. Where Jeremy Pruitt wants to take this football program, he needs the quarterback to play well. I don't know who facilitated what. Maybe it was Casey said, hey, maybe it was Jim Chaney, but the two needed to get clearly on the same page. I don't want to suggest that they were divisive against each other, because they weren't in any way, but they needed to walk closer step in step. And I think to build that relationship, they had to spend some time together. And I think it was needed for both.
Well, you go back a year ago, and Jeremy wouldn't address, if we asked about anybody individually, he just kind of brushed it off and talked about team and not individuals. And like you asked, he never wanted to address Ty Chandler by name, never wanted to talk about Jarrett Guarantano by name. Even today up there at the podium talked about, a year ago I didn't know who to bring. I didn't know who I should bring, who I shouldn't bring, and now I do. I know, look at these are kind of the key guys on this team. And I mean, they're never going to bring Trey because of, his medical stuff, because they knew it'd turn into, a billion questions about that. But, those are probably the best three they could have brought. And, I just think that those two, as you said, understand that they need each other. And Jim Chaney, to me, I think it's Jim Chaney. Maybe it was Casey, but I'm just saying, I think in my mind it's Jim Chaney works as a conduit between the two, and I think Jeremy Pruitt saw JG as, his guy, because of the way he stepped forward as a leader, and then JG's kind of took the baton of the confidence and has just run with it this offseason. I mean, he was out there at camp all summer long. He was very, very talkative with recruits. He was very talkative with teammates. I mean, different guy. Not that he's not been that way, but just seems more loose.
Rob, what's your takeaway from today?
Oh, I thought Jeremy seemed a lot more comfortable in his own skin.
Even in the 21-minute opening?
I mean, maybe especially then.
That was some deft filibustering right there.
Yeah. I agree with. I don't want to, rehash the same ground. I agree with you guys about, it's pretty clear that he and Jared, I'm not saying they were adversarial last year, but and you wrote about it, when you bring in a fifth-year grad transfer, like in Keller Chris, that's been a starter at a Power 5 school, clearly you're not convinced Jared's your guy, or, whatever. But I just thought Jeremy was comfortable in his own skin. He didn't, I just thought he presented a little more comfortably than he did this time last year in Atlanta. I'm not saying he was bad. I just feel like he's, like you would expect. Like he talked about the team. You're going to be better, and the longer you do something going into year two than you were in year one. And I think that's true of him. And I was really impressed with him. Kind of some of the things he said, particularly about maybe not building relationships with the team like he needed to with individual players in his first year while he was trying to fix all these problems. I think he learned a lot of lessons last year.
Well, I think that's the thing that jumped out. I thought his answer to whoever somebody asked him about, Derek Hansley, and he talked about, as a coordinator, you go through a series and then you go over and you go review every offensive play and you make adjustments off that. And he basically said, hey, I'm not sure I put us in the best situation defensively at times last year, because I was managing all the head coaching stuff and I was trying to be a play caller. That quote, let alone, to me, Jesse, was a growth quote of hey, I learned something from last year. Not that didn't cost them football games. That's not the reason they got blown out by Missouri or Vanderbilt or some of these other teams. But it also shows the learning curve that he's walking through as a head coach.
Yeah, and I think he then translated that to his entire football team on, what they now that they've learned how to practice, they've learned how to act, the nutrition, they've learned how the kind of the continuity in the weight room. He talked about having these, long, skinny guys, and now they have all these plus 300 pounders. Now, whether he got the exact, number correct or not,
They might have had more than 300 pounders.
There's no
last
doubt
year.
that this offensive line and this defensive line has a lot more girth and beef than it did a year ago. And Rob said it. Rob wrote about specifically defensively. It's that growth from and what have you learned and how does it translate from year one to year two?
I thought they weren't cocky in any way. They weren't making any guarantees. It certainly seems like that they certainly seem to carry a lot more confidence than even we saw, I think, in spring practice.
Yeah, and I told AP that. I said that when we did the little 2-minute drill that there was zero talk about expectations, which was kind of interesting. No one really even talked about 5 and 7 or even threw out a championship thing or whatever. But there was just kind of this. Okay, we know who we are, and I think there's something to be said for that. To kind of admit that this is who we are, and now we got to go out and play.
Well, and Rob, the fact of the matter is, this is a program that's not had a clear-cut identity for a long time. If they can develop an identity, that's a huge battle. If they can really develop an identity of who they're going to be. They tried a year ago, but obviously they didn't have enough parts in place. They still don't have all the parts they need. But if you can get to a bowl game and come through this season with an identity of, hey, this is who we are, this is who we're going to be, that's a huge accomplishment for a program that's been without an identity for nearly a decade.
Sure, and I think a big part of that is, like what Jesse was talking about. They know themselves, they're comfortable. I think they're comfortable with their head coach. I think that there was. I think part of that was by design by Jeremy last year. I think he had a lot of guys on edge on purpose.
Wanted everybody to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I'm not. Last year was a throwaway. They weren't going to be any good no matter what. I think that. I think he purposely kept a lot of guys on edge. Like we just talked about with Jarrett, and bringing in Keller Chris. I don't. He didn't throw around a lot of praise, compliment a lot of guys, and you saw that today. He was very praiseworthy of not only Jarrett but the two defensive guys he brought. He stood up at the podium and talked about his staff. Talked about
one of the best staffs in the country, if not the best staff.
I just think that he's way more conscious. And I don't know if that's. I'm not saying he wasn't conscious of it last year, but I think he is conscious of, how. Wanting people to feel good about themselves, wanting to stroke an ego here or there, wanting guys to feel comfortable and not be on edge.
Well, and the reality is that Austin, when you look at this thing, and you talked about this when you talked about office hours and different things like that, it's different when you're a head coach, and you have to learn how to manage people. And it's not that he couldn't manage people, but you learn how to manage people. And I think today was another sign of the growth and the development of that management.
Well, he talked about, today little things like, him having he loved when SEC Media Days rolled around when he was a high school coach at Hoover High School, because it meant football was right around the corner. And now as a head coach.
Yeah, and then he named about 12 people that had come from Hoover that are on Tennessee staff.
But then he says, as a head coach,
whatever.
I'm not really coaching. This is not my thing.
And so I think that we've talked about that from day one. Is he was going to be learning on the fly. And I think he's adapted really fast. Is he perfect? No, but nobody is. But is he? I think a lot better than a year ago. Yeah. I think he's starting to get dealing with people, get dealing with the media, get dealing with the whole cog, and having Jim Chaney around, I think has been the greatest thing that could have ever happened to him.
I think it's clear he's more confident in his staff than he was a year ago.
Yeah.
Not to knock on anybody else, but I think it's pretty clear he's got a lot more confidence.
A year ago, I felt like a year ago when he did these things in his mind, because I remember when he got together to do the Ball Network shoots and got together to do other things, it was we're so far behind other programs, and I don't think you hear him talk about that anymore. It's not that Tennessee's not still behind, but he feels, I think personally, they're catching up some, and. So I think because he's got guys that he trusts immensely around him, it does free him up to, go and drop the garbage into the can for the Eastman Chemical Company commercial and not feel like I'm taken away from actually trying to get this program back.
Well, I would circle it back to, because we don't know if they've actually caught up. We know that they've made moves.
Caught up some. I mean,
well, we don't even know that. I think they've made tangible moves this offseason that would suggest they should be moving in the right direction. But I think this also circles back to, he correctly surmised, this whole relationship deal. That I think that was part of the reason that a lot of these different coaches that are still on the staff are now coaching different positions. There was maybe not a relatability with something. So let's move Winky to the quarterbacks where he's more comfortable and can kind of, and so I think that's it's all a part of it, and it's all everybody has a hand in this, and maybe that wasn't the case a year ago.
Yeah, and again, I think that's product of learning in your first year. I mean, nobody gets it right out of the gate, and everybody said that a year ago. But who's to say he's got it right in year two? But clearly, he identified some things, made some adjustments, and moved forward there. Jesse, you've been down here for a couple of days. Biggest takeaway conference wide from kind of the scuttlebutt down here of whether it's rules, themes, or transfers have been talked about by everybody, all that type of thing. Biggest takeaway from down here?
In terms of, I would say, talking to people, I think it's going to be the whole officiating thing. The fact that the SEC is going to try to have this, Sankey doesn't want to use the word transparency. He keeps purposely avoiding it. But that's what this is. Steve Shaw talked about it this morning. I think that's going to be a big deal, that the SEC is basically trying to get out in front of the fact that nowadays, fans with replay and everything, it's just so accessible to see when a guy's right or wrong or if a call's made. Obviously, LSU had the two big plays that went against them a year ago, which is kind of the reason I think a lot of this has happened. They talked about the fact that, in Secaucus in the NFL, you go there's 100 people, there's officials watching, and basically the mistakes are much less than people the officiating now is way better than it was 10, 15 years ago. But I do think that's going to, I think in terms of the biggest thing, to me, that's the biggest takeaway. The transfers, the mental health, when we come here on Thursday, it's going to be Alabama and Georgia that are going to be picked. So the hierarchy isn't as big of as a discussion point.
Yeah, but it will be interesting to see. It's kind of like what Jared was saying today, Rob, when you talked about, as Jeremy Pruitt, I think Austin asked, has he mellowed out or relaxed a little bit? And he said, well, we'll see in a month. The transparency with the officiating part sounds really good right now, but you haven't been on a Sunday. You haven't had a Sunday morning yet after an official made a really bad call that's been scrutinized by thousands of people. Are you going to be as transparent as you say you're going to be?
Yeah, there's no way to answer that right now, but I'll be surprised. If you are, then somebody's going to get thrown under the bus eventually, and that's what I don't know if the conference is.
And that's the conference has never done that.
Or the Twitter, which again, had 25,000 followers in a day. It's just going to become the butt of every joke, on Sunday mornings. But again, we'll see. Steve Shaw's. It sounds like he may be going on Feinbaum each week and talking about some calls. So. Could be a disaster. Who knows? It's certainly a funny deal that that they kind of brought. And this is the SEC totally doing this themselves. No one is saying you have to do this.
But don't you think part of that's because there's so much of the hiding behind the closet, hiding in the closet? You never know if officials been public. You had the whole situation in basketball with the guy in the LSU game. And he just disappeared. Did they send him to an island for 6 or 8 weeks, Rob? Or we never saw him in a conference game after the LSU-Tennessee game, right?
No, and I don't think you will.
But
it was never addressed.
Right, it was never addressed. It was just whatever case may be. We're just not going to talk about it. So that'll be interesting to see.
I will say, and this is kind of just teasing some other stuff. In talking to some analysts here, AP and I have talked about this. We've mentioned this on the podcast. There wasn't a lot from Tennessee folks talking about expectations and what to do and to expect for this season. But and it makes sense. Tennessee fans, the people in the administration, the players, the coaches, they want to get to that Alabama and Georgia level. But to do that, you got to start beating the Kentuckys and Vanderbilts
in South Carolina.
And
first.
Missouri's.
And as Gene Chizik told me, and others, I mean, that's going to be the season. Can you do that? You do that, then you're on your way. Then suddenly you've taken that step, but you got to take that first step.
Well, Austin, that's exactly what you said on the podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I think you echoed it as well. I've talked about the BYU game being the biggest game, and you pointed out it's those 3 games end of October, first part of November when you talk about Vanderbilt, Kentucky, South Carolina as the 3 key games that will identify this football season.
Yeah, I mean, okay,
success or failure.
Because in reality, everyone is chasing Alabama and Georgia.
No question.
So you're no different. So you need to beat those other teams first.
Where are you in trying to chase them?
Exactly.
How far down the mountain are you with everybody
Again,
else?
if you go and you win, you go undefeated in non-conference, it's 4-0. And then if you flip the games that we all just talked about, there's 7 right there. At that point, you're playing with house money with other games.
Mississippi State.
Mississippi State. Because you named Missouri, Vanderbilt, and South Carolina.
I named Kentucky, Vanderbilt, South Carolina. I didn't even mention Missouri.
Okay, so that's my point though. With Mississippi State, Missouri games, those are gravy games. So I mean that's what I'm saying. Like if you win those 3, you're automatically at 7 because you're just kind of saying de facto you're beating BYU. So you're automatically at 7. At that point, you're in a bowl. At that point, you're playing for trying to get to Florida for a bowl. Because I think anything 8 or better, I think gets you to at least Jacksonville. I just think that it's those games.
3 games, and it's those 3 teams that you've got.
You need to leapfrog.
You need to leapfrog before you can talk about how close are you to catching Alabama.
Because if you win those games, and let's say you get to 8 wins, if you win those games and win one of those other Mississippi State, South Carolina, or Missouri coin flip games, you get to 8 wins. Then they are talking about going into 2020. Can you make that next step? It's kind of like Garantano. He's gotten better every year he's been here, but it's been small.
Right.
Can he take the step?
Yeah. Well, Mullen said this. Mullen said this yesterday. His comments weren't particularly enlightening across the board, but he did say, which I think is true, it's a lot easier to go from 4-8 to 8-4 than it is from 10-2 to 11-1.
Yeah.
And so Tennessee had. The schedule sets up as such. I think 8 wins is possible. To me, 7 is much more realistic. You're saying coin flip games with Missouri. That's not a coin flip game to me. South Carolina and Kentucky
what I'm saying
coin flip games.
I'm saying that I don't mean it coin flip games like in that form. I'm saying like those are like cherry on top games, gravy games. Like if you win those, then it's just then you are getting to 8 or 9 or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
And that's why consistency is going to be one of the biggest themes of this season, in my opinion.
Well,
because of what.
And right, what you're saying is what I'm saying. It's the consistency of building throughout the year.
Yes.
When's the last time, and Rob, when's the last time you said Tennessee's a better football team in November than you were in the first part of October?
Dooley's first year when Bray was a freshman.
That's probably correct.
Vols went 4-0 that year, got into a bowl game, and then had a meltdown against North Carolina.
Well, what about Butch's second season? Wasn't that when they had a big November and then beat the hell out of Iowa in the?
Yeah, you probably could go that route too.
That was when because then they entered that 15 or 16 season with a bunch of momentum.
That's when Matt Crowder and Kyler Kerberson were crying because they'd gotten bowl eligible against Vanderbilt.
But they entered the next year with we got
a lot of hype.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that they were talking about being that kind of team, but it's not been consistent enough. Because you look at Butch's last couple of years, you beat Georgia, Florida, and then you collapse in November, and
you go winless in November.
So
and then last year, I think we could all agree they just ran out of gas. You beat Kentucky. You're thinking, wow. Suddenly this changes everything, and then Missouri hangs 50 on you.
And you just get shellacked twice in a row.
You look as bad against Vanderbilt as possible.
Yeah, absolutely have. All right, let's hop to recruiting just right quick as we wrap up this podcast because we had the mailbag on Friday. Haven't talked a ton of recruiting because it's been in the dead period. Austin, what's coming down the pike? Is there anything on the horizon for Tennessee on the recruiting front as we get ready to roll out of the dead period? I know we're going to talk much more about the July 27th date and all that stuff in terms of who's coming in once the dead period lifts.
There were some shout-outs from the podium today from Jeremy Pruitt.
Yeah, he was.
Well, yeah, he knows he needs guys that can come off the edge. He knows he needs guys that can catch passes.
Right. Rakeem
And
Jarrett,
so-
were you
And we don't have
listening?
enough quarterbacks.
And a year ago that all worked out. I mean, he named Charlotte, he named West Virginia, he named Atlanta, and then
The only one he didn't get was Bogle
yeah, correct.
because he said Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah,
That was
that's
the
right.
one
He did give him a shout.
Yeah.
But everywhere else, they swept.
Yeah, so I mean, it's smart. Why not? I mean, I don't know if anybody makes it in between now and then. I just know that when I talked to Darnell, he wasn't sure the exact day he's coming in. He's coming in during
Darnell
Washington. He's coming in once the dead period lifts before it shuts down again. Could be on that weekend. I think Lenneth Whitehead will be in town for that weekend. And then obviously guys like Jalen Hyde will be here and a lot of in-state guys. So I think the next month Tennessee's really just got to focus hard on, the guys they feel like they're in a good spot with in-state wise, and then the guys that feel like they feel like are close, like Jalen Hyatt.
Well, and we talked about in-state. Reggie Grimes putting more more emphasis there. But now you've also got the Eason kid. It seems like Tennessee's maybe pushing a little harder there, Austin, than they once were. And then you got some other kids in state that Tennessee seems to be going a little bit harder on than maybe they were. You had the kid that camped, whose name completely escapes me. That camped.
Williamson.
The Williamson
Darian
kid that
Williamson.
camped. We'll see what happens with that coming out of the dead period. If they can get him back on campus, if he is close to doing something. A&M, some other schools starting to recruit there a little harder. I got to ask you, is there anything on Haynes King? Is that still a day-to-day deal?
I think that happens this week, one way or the other. I know he's got some predictions to Texas A&M today. I mean, to me, I chalk that up as no different. Haynes' people are doing very little talking. He's still having dialogue with Tennessee, and he's not told Tennessee that they're out and he's going somewhere else. So as of right now, I think it's kind of the same, but I do think a decision's coming sooner rather than later.
Do you think the head coach / dad's
Yep.
time to get
Wrap
to the
this one
finish
up,
line?
boy.
Yep, you've had now a couple of weeks post the opening. Let's get this thing done.
All right, so we'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on him. We'll keep an eye on Williamson and any Hyatt, any other kids that are going to be coming in later this month. We'll have much more details about what that 27th weekend of the 27th looks like in terms of in-state prospects and all of that stuff. Quickly, Rob, on the hoops deal, there's been talk a little bit about this kid reclassifying, maybe visiting, maybe not visiting. LSU's involved, Kentucky's involved, Oregon's involved. Doesn't feel like Tennessee's got a whole lot going on there.
Yeah,
right now.
Tennessee's trying, but the three schools you just mentioned, Dante, I'm gonna botch his first name, but Dante's his last name. 7-footer, 5-star guy.
Who might reclassify.
It sounds like he is going to reclassify.
Okay.
In Fale, I think is how you would say the first name. Tennessee is trying. Reaching out, but he's been on 3 visits to Oregon, LSU, Kentucky. Recently made an official visit to Kentucky. If Tennessee doesn't get the kid on campus in the very near future, then it's not real.
And it's not set up for
Nothing's
Tennessee.
set up
Nothing's
right
set
now.
up for them to
Right
get on
now,
campus.
and I'm not saying it's impossible by any means, but you got to get him on campus.
Right, and obviously Tennessee's in play with several kids in the 2020 class in addition to what they have committed. You mentioned Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer, P.J. Hall, who you just had a story on.
Keon Johnson deciding in 3 weeks.
Right.
That's going to be a big one.
So you got a lot going on in that class there. So whether or not Tennessee wants to, how hard do they push for somebody?
I think they're pushing hard for the kid. I'm just saying. It's not to me. It's not very real right now until you get him on campus when he's been those other 3 places.
All right, so we'll keep you.
And 3 places that Tennessee usually doesn't swim in the same waters with.
Yeah. So we'll keep
to
you
put
up
it mildly.
Yeah, we'll keep you up to date on that one as well as football.
What was
recruiting.
longer, our podcast or Pruitt's opening statement?
I don't know. It's a good question. We might have to filibuster here for a couple of minutes. We're at 24 minutes. I think.
Oh, we just beat him.
We just barely beat him.
But we both got a Miss Myra mention in. So
There
that's
you
going to
go.
do it for this edition of the Volquest.com podcast. For Austin Price, Jesse Simonton, and Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Tuesday evening, everybody.